The morning sun cast long shadows across the ornate iron gates of Willowbrook Academy, and there stood Marcus Chen, as he had every school day for the past 15 years. His weathered hands gripped the security clipboard, his eyes scanning each. A vehicle that approached the prestigious private school, the hundreds of students, parents, and faculty who passed him daily. Marcus was simply the quiet security guard who never smiled, never made small talk, and never seemed to have a life. Beyond those gates, Mrs. Patterson, the headmistress, often wondered about the man who arrived before dawn and left after dusk. She had tried engaging him in conversation countless times, but Marcus would only nod politely and return to his duties. The students had given up trying to get reactions from him years ago. Some called him the statue behind his back, others whispered that he might be mute. Even the chatty maintenance staff couldn't crack his shell of silence. What none of them knew was that Marcus carried secrets that would have shattered their perception of the humble guard they'd barely noticed. Behind his stoic exterior lay a man whose nights were filled with a life so extraordinary that even he sometimes questioned if it was real. Marcus had immigrated to the United States 22 years ago from a small village outside Shanghai. He spoke fluent Mandarin, Cantonese, and English, although he rarely used any of them at work beyond the necessary good morning and have a good day. His simple uniform and unremarkable appearance made him invisible to most, which was exactly how he preferred it. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his days protecting the children of some of the city's wealthiest families, while his own story remained untold. These were kids who would inherit fortunes, attend Ivy League universities, and never worry about their next meal. Marcus watched them with a mixture of protectiveness and melancholy, remembering his own childhood of poverty and struggle. During his lunch breaks, Marcus would sit on a small bench behind the security booth, eating a simple sandwich his wife had packed for him. He would watch the students play in the courtyard, their laughter echoing off the brick buildings. Sometimes, when a child scraped their knee or looked lost, he would quietly approach and offer assistance. His gentle touch and kind eyes would calm them instantly, though he rarely spoke beyond asking if they were okay. The other staff members noticed these small acts of kindness, but attributed them to basic human decency rather than recognizing the depth of compassion that Marcus carried. They didn't know that he had once been a teacher himself, in another life, in another country. They didn't know that education was sacred to him, that he saw potential in every child who walked through those gates. Dr. Williams, the school counselor, had observed Marcus's interactions with troubled students over the years. Somehow, kids who were acting out or having difficult days would calm down after brief encounters with the security guard. She had mentioned this phenomenon to colleagues, but none of them paid much attention. To them, Marcus was background noise. As permanent and unremarkable as the brick walls he stood beside, what puzzled Dr. Williams most was how Marcus seemed to anticipate problems before they happened. He would appear at just the right moment when tensions were high between students, or when someone was having an emotional breakdown. It was as if he had a sixth sense for human suffering. Though she could never explain how a security guard could possess such intuitive abilities. The truth was that Marcus's apparent psychic abilities were actually the result of years of careful observation and deep empathy. He noticed everything: the way a child's shoulders sagged when their parents dropped them off after an argument, the subtle signs of bullying that teachers missed, the loneliness in a student's eyes even when they were surrounded by friends. His silence wasn't indifference. It was focused attention at 3:30 each afternoon. Marcus would watch the stream of luxury cars arrive for pickup. Nannies, chauffeurs, and occasionally parents would collect their charges. He memorized which children's faces lit up when they saw their ride home and which ones seemed to dread the end of the school day. These observations formed a mental database that he carried with him, a catalog of young lives that he felt responsible for protecting. The seasonal changes at Willowbrook Academy marked the passage of time in Marcus's routine. In autumn, he would rake leaves during his breaks, creating neat piles that children would inevitably jump through. Winter brought concerns about icy walkways and the need to salt the paths before dawn. Spring meant monitoring the blooming cherry trees for students with allergies, and summer required vigilance about heat-related issues during outdoor activities. Through it all, Marcus remained the constant, silent sentinel. Parents who had attended the school themselves would return as adults and find him still there, unchanged by the decades. Some would nod in recognition, but most looked right through him, their minds already on more important matters. What none of them realized was that Marcus remembered every face, every name, and every story. He kept mental files on the children he had watched grow from kindergartners to high school graduates. He knew which ones had struggled with learning disabilities, which had dealt with their parents' divorces, and which showed signs of exceptional talent that wasn't being nurtured at home. As the sun began to set on another ordinary day at Willowbrook Academy, Marcus performed his final security check. He walked the perimeter of the campus, ensuring all gates were locked and all lights were functioning properly. The empty playground equipment cast eerie shadows in the growing darkness, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of traffic from the main road at exactly 6 o'clock. Marcus would hang up his uniform shirt in his small office, put on his worn leather jacket, and walk to the faculty parking lot, where his modest sedan waited. To anyone watching, he appeared to be just another tired worker heading home after a long day. They would never guess that his real life was just beginning, or that the man they had dismissed as unremarkable was about to transform into someone entirely different. The drive home through the city streets gave Marcus time to transition between his two worlds. The radio played softly, usually classical music that reminded him of his other life. As the school faded in his rearview mirror, the weight of his daytime persona began to lift, replaced by an anticipation that quickened his pulse and straightened his shoulders. Marcus's modest apartment building stood in stark contrast to the grand mansions surrounding Willowbrook Academy. The faded brick exterior and narrow hallways spoke of working-class families struggling to make ends meet. His neighbors knew him as the quiet man in apartment for B who worked security somewhere and kept to himself. They had no idea that behind his plain door lay a world that would have amazed them. The transformation began the moment Marcus turned his key in the lock. Inside his small living room, the walls were covered with certificates, awards, and photographs. That told a story completely different from his daytime persona. Diplomas from prestigious universities hung beside competition ribbons and newspaper clippings. But the most striking feature of his home was the black grand piano that dominated the space, its polished surface reflecting the warm light from carefully placed lamps. This was Marcus's secret, by night. He was one of the city's most sought-after piano instructors and a composer whose work was performed by orchestras around the world. The calloused hands that checked identification cards during the day could create melodies so beautiful they moved audiences to tears. The man who rarely spoke at the school gates became eloquent and passionate when discussing music theory or guiding a student through a difficult passage. Marcus had discovered his musical gift as a child in China, when a traveling missionary had left behind an old keyboard at the village school. While other children played games, young Marcus would sneak into the classroom to press the keys and experiment with sounds. His talent was undeniable, but his family's poverty made formal lessons impossible. By sheer determination, when he arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase and a dream, Marcus had planned to pursue music professionally. He enrolled in night classes at the community college, while working various day jobs to survive. His professors were amazed by his natural ability, but the path to musical success was competitive and uncertain. When his wife became pregnant with their first child, Marcus made the difficult decision to prioritize financial stability over artistic ambition. The security job at Willowbrook Academy had been meant as a temporary solution, a way to earn steady income while building his music career on the side. But 15 years had passed, and Marcus found himself trapped between two lives that seemed impossible to reconcile. The conservative school administration would never understand their security guards' artistic pursuits, and the classical music world had no patience for part-time dreamers. Each evening after arriving home, Marcus would spend an hour at the piano, letting the stress of his silent workday melt away through his fingertips. The music flowed from him like water from a spring, natural and effortless. His neighbors in the adjacent apartments had grown accustomed to the beautiful sounds that drifted through the thin walls. Mrs. Rodriguez next door often fell asleep to his nocturnal serenades, and Mr. Thompson's insomnia was soothed by the gentle melodies. What his neighbors didn't know was that Marcus's evening practice sessions were actually preparation for his second life. At 9 o'clock sharp, he would change into a pressed shirt and dark slacks, gather his sheet music and metronome, and drive across town to the Arts District. There, in a converted warehouse that had been transformed into music studios, Marcus became Professor Chen, respected instructor and composer. The Harmony Music Center buzzed with activity each night as adult students pursued their musical dreams after their day jobs ended. Lawyers learned violin, doctors studied cello, and teachers took voice lessons. Among the instructors, Marcus was known for his patience, his ability to unlock hidden potential, and his gift for making complex concepts accessible to students. Of all skill levels, Sarah Montgomery, a successful architect in her 40s, had been Marcus's student for 3 years. She often told friends that her piano lessons were the highlight of her week, but she could never adequately explain the profound way Professor Chen had changed her relationship with music. Under his guidance, she had progressed from struggling with simple scales to playing Chopin nocturnes that brought tears to her own eyes. Marcus's teaching method was unlike anything his students had experienced. He didn't just teach technique, taught them to feel the music in their souls. He would demonstrate passages with such emotion that students found themselves holding their breath, transported by the beauty of his playing. His rare smiles and words of encouragement meant everything to people who had been told they were too old to learn or lacked natural talent. But it was Marcus's original compositions that truly set him apart from other instructors. He wrote pieces specifically for each student, creating music that matched their personality, their struggles, and their growth. These personalized compositions became treasured possessions, and several students had recorded them for posterity. Word of his compositional gifts had spread through the classical music community, leading to commissions from chamber groups and soloists. The Metropolitan Chamber Orchestra had premiered 3 of Marcus's pieces in the past 2 years. Reviews had been glowing. Critics praised his ability to blend Eastern and Western musical traditions, creating works that were both technically sophisticated and emotionally accessible. His piece Migration, inspired by his own journey from China to America, had been particularly well received and was now part of several orchestras' regular repertoires. Despite his growing reputation in the music world, Marcus maintained strict boundaries between his 2 lives. He used only his surname Chen for his musical career and was careful never to mention his day job to music colleagues. The contrast between his personas was so complete that someone meeting both versions of Marcus might have trouble believing they were the same person. The financial pressures that had driven Marcus to keep the security job were gradually lessening as his music career flourished. Private lessons commanded premium rates, and his compositions were generating modest royalties. His wife, Linda, who worked as a nurse, had been encouraging him for years to pursue music full-time. She watched him struggle with the dual existence and worried about the toll it was taking on his health and happiness. Late at night, after his last student had gone home, Marcus would often stay in the studio to work on his own compositions. The empty building became his sanctuary, filled only with the sound of the piano and his own creative thoughts. These were the moments when he felt most alive, most like his true self. The melodies that emerged during these solitary sessions were often his most powerful and personal works. As he drove home through the quiet streets in the early hours of the morning, Marcus would reflect on the strange duality of his existence. By day, he was invisible and voiceless, a guardian watching over other people's children. By night, he was an artist whose music touched souls and whose talent was finally receiving recognition. The contrast was exhausting, but both roles felt essential to who he had become. The question that haunted Marcus, as he finally fell asleep each night, was how much longer he could maintain this double life, and what would happen if his 2 worlds ever collided. The first crack in Marcus's carefully constructed double life came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. Emma Rodriguez, a shy seventh grader at Willowbrook Academy, had been dropped off early by her mother, who worked the morning shift at the hospital. As usual, Emma sat alone on the bench near the security booth. Reading a book while waiting for the other students to arrive, Marcus noticed that Emma had been particularly quiet lately, even for a naturally reserved child. Her usual smile was absent, and she seemed to shrink into herself whenever other students approached. During his years of silent observation, Marcus had developed an intuitive understanding of childhood distress, and something about Emma's demeanor set off alarm bells in his mind as he performed his morning security rounds. Marcus caught glimpses of Emma sitting alone, her untouched breakfast growing cold beside her. The book in her lap remained unopened, and he could see tears threatening to spill from her eyes. His protective instincts, honed through years of watching over students, compelled him to act despite his usual policy of minimal interaction, approaching the bench slowly so as not to startle her. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Emma looked up with startled eyes, quickly wiping away the moisture that had gathered there. For a moment, they simply looked at each other in silence. Then, in a voice so soft it was barely audible above the morning breeze, Marcus asked, "Are you okay?" "Miss Rodriguez." The sound of her name spoken with such genuine concern broke something inside Emma. The tears she had been holding back began to flow freely. In between sobs, she began to tell Marcus about the piano lessons she had been forced to quit. Family's financial situation had worsened when her father lost his job, and luxuries like music lessons were the first casualties of their tightened budget. Marcus listened without interruption, his heart aching for this young girl whose dreams were being crushed by circumstances beyond her control. Emma spoke of her love for music, how the piano had been her escape from the social difficulties she faced at school. She described the pieces she had been learning, the recitals she would miss, and the teacher who had believed in her potential. Struck Marcus's most was Emma's knowledge and passion for classical music. She spoke about Debussy and Rachmaninoff with the enthusiasm of someone much older, and her understanding of musical theory was remarkably sophisticated for a 13-year-old. As she talked, Marcus saw himself as a young boy in rural China, dreaming of music but lacking the resources to pursue his passion. When Emma finished speaking, Marcus remained quiet for a long moment. The morning bell would ring soon, and students would flood the courtyard, ending this rare moment of connection. Making a decision that would forever alter the trajectory of both their lives, Marcus spoke words that surprised even himself. "Could teach you," he said simply. "Piano lessons. It's after school, if you're interested." Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. The security guard who barely spoke was offering to teach her music. She looked at his weathered hands, trying to imagine them creating the beautiful sounds she missed so desperately. Marcus, realizing how strange his offer must seem, quickly added, "I know it sounds unusual, but I do play piano. I could help you continue learning." The bell rang before Emma could respond, and she hurried off to class with a confused mixture of hope and skepticism. Marcus returned to his post, wondering what had possessed him to make such an offer. His carefully maintained separation between his two lives was about to be compromised. But something about Emma's obvious pain had made the risk seem worthwhile. That afternoon, Emma lingered near the security booth as other students departed. Marcus could see the internal debate playing out on her young face. Finally, she approached him with the tentative steps of someone testing thin ice. "Mr. Chen," she began, using the name from his security badge, "did you really mean what you said this morning? About the piano lessons?" Marcus nodded, though his own uncertainty was growing by the minute. How could he explain his musical abilities without revealing his entire secret life? How could he teach her without raising questions from parents, administrators, or other students? The logical part of his mind screamed warnings about the complications he was inviting. But his heart had already made the decision. "Yes," he said firmly, "but we would need to be discreet, and you would need your parents' permission." Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her in weeks. They arranged to meet the following day to discuss the details, and Emma practically floated to her mother's car when pickup time arrived. For the first time in his 15 years at Willowbrook Academy, Marcus had made a real connection with one of the students he was meant to protect. That evening, Marcus's piano practice took on new meaning. He found himself selecting pieces that would be appropriate for Emma's skill level, remembering the joy of sharing music with an eager student. His wife Linda noticed the change in his demeanor immediately. When he explained the situation, she was both proud of his compassion and worried about the complications it might create. The next day, Emma arrived with a handwritten note from her mother, granting permission for the lessons and expressing gratitude. For Marcus's kindness, Mrs. Rodriguez had been devastated when they could no longer afford Emma's music education, knowing how much it meant to her daughter. The unexpected generosity of the school security guard seemed like a miracle. Marcus arranged for the lessons to take place in the school's music room after hours. The building was nearly empty by 4 p.m., providing the privacy they needed. When Emma first heard Marcus's play, her mouth fell open in astonishment. The man she had known as a silent guardian was creating music of breathtaking beauty and complexity. "How are you so good?" Emma asked in wonder, as Marcus finished a stunning rendition of Chopin's Minute Waltz. Marcus smiled, one of the first genuine smiles anyone at Willowbrook Academy had ever seen from him. "Music has been my passion for a very long time," he said simply. "Now, let me hear what you remember from your previous lessons." As Emma played a simple piece she had memorized, Marcus listened with the trained ear of a professional instructor. Her technique needed work, but her musicality was exceptional. She played with feeling rather than just hitting the right notes, a quality that couldn't be taught. Marcus realized he had found a truly gifted student. Over the following weeks, their afternoon sessions became the highlight of both their days. Emma's skills improved rapidly under Marcus's expert guidance, and her confidence began to return. She started participating more in class and seemed to carry herself with renewed pride. Other students began to notice the positive change in the girl who had previously been nearly invisible. Marcus found that teaching Emma rekindled his own passion for music in unexpected ways. Watching her discover new pieces and master difficult passages reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. The lessons became as much about his own rediscovery of joy as they were about Emma's education. The secret lessons continued through the autumn months, with Emma's playing improving dramatically. Marcus began to introduce her to more challenging pieces, and her rapid progress amazed even him. She had a natural gift that reminded him of his own childhood discovery of music. He began to see possibilities for her future that her family's financial situation had seemed to eliminate. As winter approached, Marcus realized that their private lessons had created a bond that transcended the normal teacher-student relationship. Emma had become like the daughter he and Linda had never been able to have, and he found himself deeply invested in her future. The question now was how long they could maintain their secret arrangement before the two worlds Marcus had worked so hard to keep separate finally collided. The collision between Marcus's two worlds came in the most unexpected way possible. Dr. Margaret Williams, the school counselor who had long noticed Marcus's intuitive way with troubled students, was working late one evening when she heard piano music drifting from the music room. The playing was extraordinary, far beyond what any student at Willowbrook Academy was capable of producing. Curious, Dr. Williams followed the sound down the empty hallway. Through the small window in the music room door, she saw a sight that stopped her in her tracks. Marcus Chen, the silent security guard, was seated at the piano, his fingers moving with the grace and precision of a concert pianist. Beside him stood Emma Rodriguez, one of the students Dr. Williams had been concerned about. Watching with rapt attention as Marcus demonstrated a difficult passage, Dr. Williams stood frozen, trying to reconcile what she was witnessing with everything. She thought she knew about the man she had worked alongside for years. The music Marcus was creating was not just technically perfect. It was deeply moving, filled with emotion and artistry that spoke of professional training and natural talent. This was not the hobby playing of a security guard who had learned a few songs. This was the work of a master musician. As she watched, Marcus finished the piece and turned to Emma with a smile that transformed his entire face. The stern, silent man she knew from the hallways was gone, replaced by someone warm, animated, and clearly passionate about teaching. Emma's face glowed with excitement as she took her place at the piano bench and began to play the same passage. Her technique showing remarkable improvement from what Dr. Williams remembered from the student's previous performances in school. Concerts. Unable to contain her amazement any longer, Dr. Williams knocked softly on the door. Both Marcus and Emma froze, their faces showing the panic of conspirators caught in the act. Marcus rose slowly and opened the door, his expression already returning to its usual guarded neutrality. "Dr. Williams," he said simply, as if being discovered giving piano lessons was the most natural thing in the world. "Mr. Chen," she replied, still struggling to process what she had witnessed. "I heard the music and thought, well, I didn't expect to find you here." Emma looked between the two adults, uncertain whether she was in trouble. Dr. Williams quickly reassured her with a gentle smile before turning back to Marcus with questions in her eyes. "Perhaps we could talk after Emma's lesson is finished," Marcus suggested, his voice carrying a resignation that suggested he had always known this moment would come eventually. Dr. Williams nodded and retreated to her office, her mind racing with implications. 20 minutes later, Marcus knocked on her door, his usual stoic expression firmly in place, but unable to hide the uncertainty in his eyes. "How long have you been giving Emma lessons?" Dr. Williams asked without preamble. Marcus replied honestly. "She was struggling after having to quit her private lessons due to financial difficulties. I offered to help." "It's very kind of you," Dr. Williams said, then paused before asking the question that was burning in her mind. "Where did you learn to play like that, Mr. Chen?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. He could deflect, minimize his abilities, and try to maintain the facade he had constructed. But something about Dr. Williams's genuine concern and the way she had spoken to Emma made him decide to take a risk he had avoided for 15 years. "I studied music in college," he said carefully. "I still play, and I teach some students in the evenings." Was a massive understatement, but it was more truth than Marcus had shared with anyone at Willowbrook Academy since the day he started working there. Dr. Williams sensed there was much more to the story, but she also recognized the significance of what Marcus had just revealed. "Your playing is extraordinary," she said simply. "I've never heard anything like that outside of professional concerts." Marcus's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly at the compliment. For 15 years, no one at the school had seen him as anything more than a security guard. Have his artistry recognized, even in this limited way, was both thrilling and terrifying. "Mock is very talented," Marcus said, redirecting the conversation away from himself. "She has natural musicality that's rare at her age. With proper instruction, she could have a real future in music." Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with new eyes. She was beginning to understand that there was far more to the quiet security guard than anyone had imagined. "What do you think we should do about these lessons? Officially, I mean?" This was the question Marcus had been dreading. Once the administration knew about his after-hours teaching, there would be questions, policies to consider, liability concerns, and ultimately the exposure of abilities that might complicate his carefully constructed simple life at the school. "I understand if you feel you need to report this," Marcus said quietly. "I never intended to create problems for the school. I was only trying to help Emma." Dr. Williams was quiet for several minutes, considering the situation from multiple angles. Finally, she leaned forward with a small smile. "Actually, Mr. Chen, I think what you're doing is wonderful. Emma has been like a different child these past few months. She's more confident, more engaged in her classes, and she seems genuinely happy for the first time since I've known her." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but Dr. Williams wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "I think we're missing an opportunity here. The school has been looking for ways to expand our music program, particularly to help students who might not otherwise have access to quality instruction. Would you be interested in making this official?" The suggestion hit Marcus like a physical blow. Making his teaching official would mean stepping out of the shadows he had carefully maintained for 15 years. It would mean questions about his qualifications, background checks that might reveal his professional music career, and ultimately the end of his simple, anonymous existence at Willowbrook Academy. I'm not sure that would be appropriate," Marcus stammered. "I'm just the security guard." Dr. Williams smiled at his response. "Mr. Chen, You may wear a security guard's uniform during the day, but what I witnessed tonight suggests you're much more than that. The way you played, the way you taught Emma, ... That was the work of a professional musician, Marcus realized. That his carefully constructed wall between his two lives had developed its first major crack. And through that crack, the light of his artistic identity was beginning to shine through. The question now was whether he was ready to let that light illuminate his entire existence at Willowbrook Academy. "Can I think about it?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Dr. Williams replied, "but don't think too long. Emma isn't the only student at this school who could benefit from the kind of instruction you're capable of providing. And frankly, the school could benefit from having someone with your obvious talents as part of our faculty." Walked back to his security booth to finish his evening rounds. His mind was spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. The conversation with Dr. Williams had opened a door he had kept firmly closed for 15 years. The question now was whether he had the courage to walk through it and finally allow his two worlds to become one. That night, as he sat at his piano. At home, Marcus played with a mixture of excitement and anxiety he hadn't felt in years. The music that flowed from his fingers reflected his emotional turmoil, shifting between hopeful melodies and uncertain harmonies. For the first time since he had started working at Willowbrook Academy, Marcus allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to be fully himself in both of his worlds. The weekend gave Marcus time to wrestle with Dr. Williams's proposal. But it was his wife Linda who finally helped him see the situation clearly. As they sat in their small kitchen on Sunday morning, sharing coffee and the newspaper, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on anything except the decision that lay before him. "You've been quiet since Friday," Linda observed, looking up from the arts section she had been reading. "More quiet than usual, which is saying something." Marcus set down his coffee cup and looked at his wife of 25 years. If anyone deserved to know about his professional struggles and the impossible balancing act he had been maintaining, it was Linda. She had supported his musical dreams even when they seemed impractical, and she had never complained about the late nights and the exhaustion that came with living two separate lives. "Dr. Williams wants me to teach music at the school officially," Marcus said simply. "She discovered me giving lessons to one of the students." Linda's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's wonderful, Marcus. This could be the opportunity you've been waiting for. You could finally combine your passion with stable employment." "Dat." Marcus shook his head, his expression troubled. "What?" "It's not that simple. If I become an official instructor, they'll want to know about my qualifications. Background checks, references, credentials. They'll discover everything about my night work. The compositions, the performances, and that would be terrible because..." Linda asked gently. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, realizing that his fear wasn't really about exposure itself, but about change. For 15 years, his double life had been complicated but predictable. He knew exactly what was expected of him in each role, and he had become comfortable with the separation between Marcus, the security guard, and Professor Chen, the musician. "What if they don't understand?" he finally asked. "What if they think I've been dishonest all these years? What if the parents don't want their children learning from someone who couldn't make it as a full-time musician?" Linda reached across the table and took his hands in hers. "Marcus, you have made it as a musician. You teach professionals. Your compositions are performed by orchestras, and you have reviews that call your work brilliant. The fact that you also worked security to support our family doesn't diminish your accomplishments. If anything, it shows your dedication to both your art and your responsibilities." That afternoon, Marcus called Dr. Williams and asked if they could meet on Monday morning before school started. He had decided to tell her the complete truth about his musical career, whatever the consequences might be. Monday morning found Marcus in Dr. Williams's office at 7 a.m., a folder of documents in his lap that he had never thought he would share with anyone from Willowbrook Academy. Reviews from the Metropolitan Chamber Orchestra's performances of his compositions, certificates from his teaching at the Harmony Music Center, photographs from recitals where his students had performed his original pieces. Dr. Williams listened in amazement as Marcus explained his dual existence. Her initial surprise at discovering his piano skills had been nothing compared to learning that they're quiet. Security guard was actually a composer whose work was performed professionally, and a teacher, whose students included some of the city's most accomplished amateur musicians. Why didn't you ever mention any of this? Dr. Williams asked, when Marcus finished his explanation. Your qualifications are extraordinary. You could have been teaching here from the beginning. Marcus considered the question carefully. When I first applied for the security position, I needed the job desperately. My wife was pregnant, and I couldn't afford to be particular about work. I thought if I mentioned my music background, you might think I wouldn't take the security position seriously, that I would leave as soon as something better came along. And after you established yourself here, the longer I waited, the harder it became to bring up. I was afraid it would seem like I had been dishonest. Honestly, I was comfortable with the arrangement. Security job provided stability, and my evening teaching satisfied my need to share music. Dr. Williams shook her head in wonder. Marcus, do you realize what a gift this could be for our students? We have children here who could benefit tremendously from instruction at your level. Emma is clearly just the beginning. Over the next hour, they discussed the possibilities. Willowbrook Academy had been considering expanding their music program for years, but budget constraints had made hiring a full-time music instructor difficult. Having Marcus transition from security to part-time music instruction while maintaining some of his current duties could solve multiple problems at once. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would continue his morning security duties, but his afternoon hours would be spent teaching individual and small group music lessons. The school would provide the proper insurance and liability coverage. Marcus would be compensated as a part-time instructor in addition to his security wages. There's one more thing, Dr. Williams said as their meeting wound down. The school board has been looking for someone to direct our annual spring concert. It's usually just the students performing simple pieces, but with someone of your abilities. Involved. Marcus felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect. He had always enjoyed ensemble work, and the idea of creating something special with the Willowbrook students appealed to him tremendously. The hardest part was telling Emma that their secret lessons would no longer be secret. When Marcus explained the new arrangement to her that afternoon, her reaction surprised him. Does this mean other students will be able to take lessons too? She asked. When Marcus nodded, Emma's face lit up with genuine joy. It's wonderful. There are other kids here who love music but can't afford lessons. Now they'll have the same chance I got. Her selfless response reminded Marcus why he had been drawn to help her in the first place. Emma's natural generosity and love of music made her an ideal student, but more than that, made her an ideal person. Word of the new music program spread quickly through Willowbrook Academy. Parents who had been frustrated by the limited arts offerings suddenly found themselves intrigued by the prospect of their children studying with a composer whose work was performed professionally. The waiting list for lessons grew rapidly, and Marcus found himself in the unfamiliar position of being sought after rather than invisible. Mrs. Patterson, the head mistress, was initially skeptical when Dr. Williams presented the proposal. The idea that their security guard was an accomplished musician seemed too improbable to believe. But when she listened to recordings of Marcus's compositions and read the glowing reviews from music critics, her skepticism transformed into excitement. About the possibilities, the transition wasn't without its challenges. Some parents questioned whether someone who had worked security was qualified to teach their children, despite his impressive credentials. Marcus faced these doubts with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his years of anonymity, letting his teaching speak for itself. The first group lesson was a revelation for everyone involved. Marcus worked with 6 students of varying skill levels, somehow managing to challenge each one appropriately while maintaining a cohesive group dynamic. His patience was infinite, his encouragement genuine, and his ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms was remarkable. Sarah Jenkins, a 10th grader who had struggled with traditional piano teachers, found herself making rapid progress under Marcus's guidance. He doesn't just tell you what to do, she told her mother after her first lesson. He helps you understand why the music wants to be played that way. As winter melted into spring, Marcus's dual role at Willowbrook Academy evolved into something he had never expected: complete integration of his 2 passions. His morning security duties kept him connected to the daily life of the school, allowing him to observe which students might benefit from musical instruction. His afternoon teaching sessions filled him with the joy he'd always found in sharing music with eager learners. The most dramatic change was in Marcus himself. The stern, silent figure who had stood at the gates for 15 years began to smile more, to engage in brief conversations with students and faculty, and to carry himself with a confidence that had been hidden beneath his security guard persona. People began to see him not as the invisible guardian they had taken for granted, but as a valued member of the school community. Emma continued to be his star student, but she was no longer alone in her musical journey. The small group of students who gathered for advanced lessons became like a musical family, supporting and challenging each other under Marcus's guidance. They learned not just technique and theory, but the deeper joy of musical expression and collaboration. The spring concert that Marcus organized became the talk of the school district. Instead of the usual simple recital pieces, he arranged and composed music that showcased each student's strengths while creating a cohesive artistic experience. Parents who attended expecting a typical school performance found themselves moved to tears by the beauty and sophistication of what they witnessed. During the concert's finale, Marcus took the stage himself for the first time in his 15 years at Willowbrook Academy. He performed one of his own compositions, a piece inspired by his journey from silent observer to integrated community member. The audience's standing ovation lasted for several minutes, and many people commented afterward that they had never realized such talent existed within their school community. As Marcus packed up his music that night after the concert, he reflected on the profound changes the past year had brought. The man who had spent 15 years hiding his true self had discovered that authenticity brought rewards he had never imagined possible. The fear that had kept his world separate had been replaced by the joy of living as his complete self. The transformation was not just professional, but deeply personal. Marcus no longer felt the exhaustion that had plagued him for years, the constant stress of maintaining separate identities. The energy he had once spent on concealment was now channeled into creativity and connection. His relationship with Linda had deepened as she watched him finally embrace all aspects of his identity, and his health improved as the burden of secrecy lifted from his shoulders.